everyone. Welcome to Some of Each, in which I read you some fiction, some poetry, and some children's lit on a specific theme. And tonight, the theme for episode 5 is storm. So, I've got all kinds of fun things to read you. There was much to choose from on this theme. So tonight I'm going to start with some fiction for you. I'm going to read to you from Life of Pi by Yann Martel, and I'm guessing many of you have probably seen the movie. The book is even better. But for those of you unfamiliar with the story, it is about a 16-year-old boy from India who is the son of a zookeeper, and when he and his family get on a Japanese cargo boat to emigrate to North America with their zoo animals, it sinks, and he ends up on a lifeboat with a bunch of the animals until it comes down to just him and a Bengal tiger who he refers to as Richard Parker. So I am just going to read to you a very small section from Life of Pi by Yann Martel, in which Pi and the Bengal tiger, Richard Parker, are caught in a storm after being at sea already for several weeks. So, here we go. The storm came on slowly one afternoon. The clouds looked as if they were stumbling along before the wind, frightened. The sea took its cue. It started rising and falling in a manner that made my heart sink. I took in the solar stills and the net. Oh, you should have seen that landscape. What I had seen up till now were mere hillocks of water. These swells were truly mountains. The valleys where we found ourselves in were so deep they were gloomy. Their sides were so steep, the lifeboat started sliding down them, nearly surfing. The raft was getting exceptionally rough treatment, being pulled out of the water and dragged along, bouncing every which way. I deployed both sea anchors fully, at different lengths, so that they would not interfere with each other. Climbing the giant swells, the boat clung to the sea anchors like a mountain climber to a rope. We would rush up until we reached a snow-white crest in a burst of light and foam and a tipping forward of the lifeboat. The view would be clear for miles around, but the mountain would shift and the ground beneath us would start sinking in a most stomach-sickening way. In no time, we would be sitting once again at the bottom of a dark valley, different from the last, but the same, with thousands of tons of water hovering above us and with only our flimsy lightness to save us. The land would move once more, the sea anchor ropes would snap to tautness, and the roller coaster would start again. The sea anchors did their job well, in fact, nearly too well. Every swell at its crest wanted to take us for a tumble, but the anchors beyond the crest heaved mightily and pulled us through, but at the expense of pulling the front of the boat down. The result was an explosion of foam and spray at the bow. I was soaked through and through each time. Then a swell came up that was particularly intent on taking us along. This time the bow vanished under water. I was shocked and chilled and scared witless. I barely managed to hold on. The boat was swamped. I heard Richard Parker roar. I felt death was upon us. The only choice left to me was death by water or death by animal. I chose death by animal. While we sank down the back of the swell, I jumped onto the tarpaulin and unrolled it toward the stern, closing in Richard Parker. If he protested, I did not hear him. Faster than a sewing machine working a piece of cloth, I hooked down the tarpaulin on both sides of the boat. We were climbing again. The boat was lurching upwards steadily. It was hard to keep my balance. The lifeboat was now covered and the tarpaulin battened down except at my end. I squeezed in between the side bench and the tarpaulin and pulled the remaining tarpaulin over my head. I did not have much space. Between bench and gunwale there was 12 inches, and the side benches were only 1.5 feet wide. But I was not so foolhardy, even in the face of death, as to move onto the floor of the boat. There were 4 hooks left to catch. I slipped a hand through the opening and worked the rope. With each hook done, it was getting harder to get the next. I managed 2 hooks left. The boat was rushing upwards in a smooth and unceasing motion. The incline was over 30 degrees. I could feel myself being pulled down towards the stern. Twisting my hand frantically, I succeeded in catching one more hook with the rope. It was the best I could do. This was not a job meant to be done from the inside of the lifeboat, but from the outside. I pulled hard on the rope, something made easier by the fact that holding onto it was preventing me from sliding down the length of the boat. The boat swiftly passed a 45-degree incline. We must have been at 60-degree incline when we reached the summit of the swell and broke through its crest onto the other side. The smallest portion of the swell's supply of water crashed down on us. I felt as if I were being pummeled by a great fist. The lifeboat abruptly tilted forward and everything was reversed. I was now at the lower end of the lifeboat and the water that had swamped it, with a tiger soaking in it, came my way. I did not feel the tiger. I had no precise idea of where Richard Parker was. It was pitch black beneath the tarpaulin, but before we reached the next valley, I was half drowned. For the rest of the day and into the night, we went up and down, up and down, up and down, until terror became monotonous and was replaced by numbness and a complete giving up. I held onto the tarpaulin rope with one hand and the edge of the bow bench with the other, while my body lay flat against the side bench. In this position, water pouring in, water pouring out, the tarpaulin beat me into a pulp. I was soaked and chilled. I was bruised and cut by bones and turtle shells. The noise of the storm was constant, as was Richard Parker's snarling. Sometime during the night, my mind noted that the storm was over. We were bobbing on the sea in a normal way. Through a tear in the tarpaulin, I glimpsed the night sky, starry and cloudless. I undid the tarpaulin and lay on top of it. I noticed the loss of the raft at dawn. All that was left of it were 2 tied oars and the life jacket between them. They had the same effect on me as the last standing beam of a burnt-down house would have on a householder. I turned and scrutinized every quarter of the horizon. Nothing. My little marine town had vanished. That the sea anchors miraculously were not lost, they continued to tug at the lifeboat faithfully, was a consolation that had no effect. The loss of the raft was perhaps not fatal to my body, but it felt fatal to my spirits. The boat was in a sorry state. The tarpaulin was torn in several places, some tears evidently the work of Richard Parker's claws. Much of our food was gone, either lost overboard or destroyed by the water that had come in. I was sore all over and had a bad cut on my thigh. The wound was swollen and white. I was nearly too afraid to check the contents of the locker. Thank God none of the water bags had split. The net and the solar stills, which I had not entirely deflated, had filled the empty space and prevented the bags from moving too much. I felt exhausted and depressed. I unhooked the tarpaulin at the stern. Richard Parker was so silent I wondered whether he had drowned. He hadn't. As I rolled back the tarpaulin to the middle bench and daylight came to him, he stirred and growled. He climbed out of the water and set himself on the stern bench. I took out needle and thread and went about mending the tears in the tarpaulin. Later, I tied one of the buckets to a rope and bailed the boat. Richard Parker watched me distractedly. He seemed to find nearly everything I did boring. The day was hot, and I proceeded slowly. One haul brought me something I had lost. I considered it. Cradled in the palm of my hand was all that remained between me and death, the last of the orange whistles. So that is a chapter from Life of Pi by Yann Martel. I'm actually going to read you 2 little bits of fiction tonight since they're short. Next I'm going to read to you from Karen Russell's new collection, Orange World, which is wonderful. This particular story is called The Tornado Auction, and I'm going to read you 2 tiny pieces of it, but it is about a tornado farmer, of course, who is retired, but he goes to an auction and purchases a new funnel cloud. So these are 2 short pieces from The Tornado Auction. You know, there was never any money in it, even back then. If you were a breakdown, you were a success. I'd been fully retired for nearly 15 years when I decided on a whim to return to the sale barn. Driving home from the pharmacy, passing the shoals of purple corn, I watched the wheel turning in my hands. The barn's howling interior, with its warrens of wind hoses, was as familiar to me as my home, but I recognized almost no one. How young the faces had become. Just about everybody I've ever wanted to impress, I've now outlived. Baby Southerlies whinnied around, shrieking their inhuman sounds. Violet funnels chased one another beneath the shivering ducts. Crocus blue mists, soft as exhalations, fogged their incubator walls. I felt a growl under my navel as I passed Chute 7, the doorway out of which my own twisters had flown once upon a time. New lunacies greeted me on either side. What a catalogue of weathers my peers were now breeding, dreaming up on their ranch lands. Clouds branded pink cauliflower and Lucifer's bridal veil. Clouds almost too bloated with rain to move. I found plenty to admire despite the grim forecasts I'd been reading all year. Moisture began to clot at my glasses, so I removed them. Some things I swear I see better without correction. Tornadoes, for one. My eyes often snag on irrelevancies when I'm wearing my glasses. Without them, I can take in more. The panorama, the whole sublime blur. Estelle, I think, hated the sight of my naked face. Jesus, Robert, do you know how scary you look wandering around out there like Mr. Magoo? The national anthem cranked up and everyone stood. By the old custom, one of the local families had donated a runty funnel, set to manifest at the crowd's off-key crescendo. So while we sang Hands on Heart, a howler blew out of Chute 1. Oh my God, I breathed, and I felt the way I always hoped to feel in church. As the twister kicked and spun around the arena floor, the howl rose from its center, throbbing without discrimination into and through each of us, and row by row, we fell helplessly to our knees. I'm going to skip into the middle of the story and read you another section as he's taking care of his funnel cloud that he's bought at the auction. When I reached the shelter, the funnel was suspended between the floor and ceiling vents, looking more irritable than powerful. The anemometer reported no gain in speed, but the wind girdles showed a fairly consistent circumference. By that sound spiraling out, I'd forgotten how a roar like that can fill you up entirely. Hearing loss is part of aging, I suppose, but I hadn't guessed you could go deaf even to a sound's howling absence. To the absence of all pleasure in your life. Now it seemed absurd that I'd endured so many years without a storm to nurse. How had I survived the peace and quiet? My ears were swamped until there was no longer any room for thought. I moved, and it was the sound moving me. 2 transparent tunnels run from the shelter to the shining fence line between the birches. Cost a fortune to put them in, and then I got only a decade's use out of them before Estelle delivered her ultimatum. It's a joy to watch the young funnel exercise. I hit the lever that releases the doors, and the cloud burst into view, flying the length of the tunnels, blown up and back by the fans. Having enough pasture land to run your twisters is essential. That spaciousness I have in abundance. Beautiful country, covered in wildflowers and yucca blooms when we get enough rain. From a plain, you can see the erosion lines where the grasslands become the badlands. So much land, Bobby, Estelle used to say. Why don't you try growing something else? There's another tornado shelter that we never finished, on the other side of the house. There it sits, accusing me still, with the quiet eloquence of my father's old jalopies rusting in the bunch grass. Robert, would you fix those things or sell them, please? Estelle would plead, and I'd tell her, which I thought was a pretty good joke, I'm forming an artificial reef. I used to insist the second shelter was at an early stage of completion. Then it gradually became a stalled construction. It was a decade before I used the word abandoned. Now, thanks to my recent purchase, I was going to die penniless, all good intentions still waiting in the rain. For some reason, the sight of grass poking between the ruined planks of the foundation filled me with relief. Wind plucked at my shirt, tugging at the sleeves. In a cooperative spirit, I undid the buttons and shrugged it to the ground. Nobody would find me out here on my hands and knees, crawling around the periphery of the shelter to check its ventilation. Nobody would comment on my slack, hairy belly. Nobody would say a word for or against me because nobody was watching at all. Around noon, the good feeling broke into articulation, and I could voice precisely what had been making me so happy. Because I'd finally done it, hadn't I? I'd outlasted my life. The girls were grown. Estelle was gone. There was nobody left for me to hurt. Live long enough and your life becomes your own to gamble with again. So that's from the tornado auction from Karen Russell's Orange World. To find out what happens with that tornado that he raises, you're going to have to read the story. It's a good one. So, all right, I'm going to read you some poetry now. First, from a book by my friend Deborah Akers called Backward Pilgrim. And Deborah's also a Coloradan. I grew up in Colorado, and so we both have a fondness for the thunderstorms that happen there, particularly in the summer. That's one of the things I miss about Colorado. Here in Portland, we get plenty of rain, but it's little rain compared to Colorado, which has big rain. So I'm going to read you 2 poems from Deborah's book. This first one is called The Front Range. Rupture. Earth's tissue, ragged in high relief, is ordinary. The day's landscape. We know the season or gauge a storm with a glance at granite shattered by sky's ice grip. Heights defiant of human lungs, a constant peripheral sight, a comfort even. Childhood's isolation soothed by waves of peak, predicting a future hued with blue benevolence. Extravagant sweeps of shadow sketch fictions of valleys whose shelter deepens in storm. Distant ranges imply that a glimpse through the glass darkly will please us. This torn horizon, the true shape of the world. I'm going to read you one more. Again, this is Deborah Akers from Backward Pilgrim. This one is called St. Elmo. 1. The valley's seam narrows and cinches at St. Elmo, final mountain mining town in the Sawatch Range, abandoned except for the lone violent woman who runs the tourist store. Sunlight snuffs out behind the climbing car. Storms start a cold boil over peaks to the north, sealing miles of sky below as we move with shadows up the jagged dirt road. At 10,000 feet, our lungs shrink with familiar alarm, and we laugh at the sparse, fierce air, briefly pacing the town's skeletal ring of false fronts and shacks, while the surrounding green crags darken and chill. Then, racing for the store's tiny porch, grabbing peanuts for warmth, the woman's eyes ice at our backs as a blizzard of hail shatters this high, fragile edge of summer. 2. As the car eases between pine and scrub oak burdened with ice, we steam the windows with stories of other close calls. Reptilian storms, as much our past as phantom relations, brooding above the family climate. Hail clatter fades to the void of soft rain as we reach pavement through squalls, though squalls still batter trees in the rearview mirror. We are near forgetting when the car swerves into the brink of a flash flood. Hillside in shreds, the stained linen torn at the grain, bared muddy roots cling as frigid waters dissemble decades of soil. Within minutes, granite slabs have released the past. An embankment departs, loads of brush and gravel dragging in its wake. The damaged slope transformed by daily ritual of mountain storm. 3. Senses sheared, we make a slow detour, winding back down reproachful mud roads. The sun returns, glittering on scree and slashed trees, the way bright fragments of dream scar the waking mind. We rush toward relief. Dry clothes, dinner of trout, hot mineral pool, steam beseeching an aloof congregation of stars. We've been here before. Sisters soothing ourselves against beauty so hugely indifferent to these foolish shelters. Love, our human hovering, the perilous need for warmth. So that's Deborah Akers from Backward Pilgrim. And I'm going to read you a couple of my poems. Okay. So This one is from Navigation, which was my first book from 2012. Fittingly, The Habit of Rainy Nights Press. There's several poems about place in this book, and again, as I mentioned, I grew up in Colorado, and so this particular poem is about those thunderstorms that I miss so much. It's called Denver's Rain. The gutter in front of our house on Glencoe Street had a section wide and deep as the bowl of a pelvis, rimmed with asphalt that softened with the heat, fingered into the cracks of the concrete, steamed and hissed when the rains began. Late summer afternoons in Denver meant thunderstorms, the sky opening up and the full gong of the storm resounding in my 5-year-old body. Severe thunderstorm watch. It was still safe to be playing outside with my sister, the hose spreading sheets of water down the driveway and into the big gutter. My mother was still snapping beans on the front porch, silver mixing bowls at her browned bare feet. We could hear the wind leaning into the crabapple tree in the backyard with its moist breath of thunder, the tree rocking in and out of the dark sky and dropping its red fruit. Severe thunderstorm warning. We had to pull everything in, shut off the hose as the sky, cracking, let the first drops fall. We gathered up our cats as our mother collected her beans and moved us into the house. The small TV brightened before us, and we watched the weathermen on Storm Center 4 point out tornadoes, fascinated, secretly hoping one would head for our house. My mother tried to keep us away from the windows, but we wanted to watch the lightning, count the storm's movement towards us in the seconds between the split and the sky rolling itself whole again. Wanted to watch the big gutter fill until it spilled onto the sidewalk, the water rushing around the block like our dog when he got loose, hail the size of ping-pong balls casting the lawn into winter. And we sat in the dark of the house, the crabapple tree losing leaves a season too soon, thinking of the possibilities of mud and bluing skies, the gutter now indistinguishable from the body of the storm. So that's me from Navigation, Denver's Rain. And then I'm going to read you one poem from my current manuscript, Daughters, which is going to be out from Airlie Press in 2021. And these are all persona poems in the voices of daughters of various people. And this one is Storm Chaser's Daughter. And I'm going to show it to you because this one has a shape. So let's see if you can, I don't know if you can see the paper here, but this is in the shape of a tornado. So this is Storm Chaser's Daughter. For years, he left me behind, cocooned in blankets or staring down the dolls in their plain wooden house, imagining the funnel's touchdown and imminent disaster, waiting for his return with the story, the proof, the skin of prairie dust brought in on his shoes. His deft weather words spun circles about my head in the flurry of his retelling, the wide sweep of vortex and downdrift, ominous thwacking of supercell, rain-wrapped, quiet build of outbreak, atmospheric instability, disturbance, inversion, cumulonimbus, squall. I imagined the gathering of darkness, how the sky would become a shadow of itself, shift to pitch in the heat of the late spring afternoon, how the singing of insects and horned larks would cease, the silence spreading out in a rolling wave, and the eerie stillness would falter in the darkling reach. How the clouds would fold over one another and begin to drop. How the rumbling would start up as a guttural groan. How the wisps of black air would assemble and twist, join and suction down. I imagined my father hastening his car down the dirt roads, the grass on either side, first a sway and then bending in earnest to whip against the ground. The windows of the car would be down just then, to listen as the wind made a rushing against the earth, the trees, the occasional trusting house. And then the windows up, the hunkering down, the twin impulses to halt and also press in for a better view. So when my father at last took me with him, I prepared for what I had dreamed on. I had forecast this chase such endless, practiced times, predicted its various patterns of reverence and fear, severe clear or firing storm. I knew my Dopplers, satellites, anemometers, understood ground truth. First, there was the vastness, the dual flattened earth and sky. The coming storm felt gradual and invited, until it cracked and descended, bearing scattershot debris, made of might and swift noise and fell shade. My heart whipped up and my calm eyes met my father's, and he gunned it, and we flew. So that's Storm Chaser's Daughter from Daughters, forthcoming next year from Airly Press. We need more thunder. All right. So I'm going to end tonight with one of my favorite children's books from when my kids were little, Bear Snores On by Karma Wilson, with absolutely wonderful illustrations by Jane Chapman. And so I kind of need a beatbox in the background for this one because I used to read this like fairly rapidly with kind of a rap beat. I'm going to try to slow it down a little bit for y'all tonight and resist that. But one of my very favorite things about this book is that while many, many children's books are written in rhyme, very few of them are written in good rhyme with the actual good meter and rhythm and rhyme scheme. And this one is perfect. It's perfect, people. So this is Bear Snores On. Look, it's winter. Bear snores on. In a cave in the woods, in his deep dark lair, through the long cold winter, sleeps a great brown bear. Cuddled in a heap with his eyes shut tight, he sleeps through the day, he sleeps through the night. Ooh. The cold winds howl and the night sounds growl, but the bear snores on. An itty-bitty mouse, pitter-pat tiptoe, creep crawls in the cave from the fluff-cold snow. Mouse squeaks, too damp, too dank, too dark, so he lights wee twigs with a small hot spark. The coals pip-pop and the wind doesn't stop, but the bear snores on. Two glowing eyes sneak peek in the den. Mouse cries, "Who's there?" And a hare hops in. "Ho, Mouse," says Hare, "long time no see." So they pop white corn and they brew black tea. Mouse sips wee slurps. Hare burps big burps. But the bear snores on. A badger scuttles by, sniffs, snuffs at the air. "I smell yummy yums. Perhaps we can share?" "I've brought honey nuts," Badger says with a grin. "Let's divvy them up, cozy down, and dig in." And they nibble and they munch with a chew, chomp, crunch, but the bear snores on. A gopher and a mole tunnel up through the floor, then a wren and a raven flutter in through the door. Mole mutters, "What a night! What a storm!" twitters wren, and everybody clutters in the great bear's den. They tweet and they titter, they chat and they chitter, but the bear snores on. In a cave in the woods, a slumbering bear sleeps through the party in his very own lair. Hare stokes the fire, Mouse seasons stew, then a small pepper flap makes the bear achoo! He blows and he sneezes and the whole crowd freezes. And the bear wakes up. Bear gnarls and he snarls. Bear roars and he rumbles. Bear jumps and he stomps. Bear growls and he grumbles. You've snuck in my lair and you've all had fun. But me, I was sleeping and I've had none. And he whimpers and he moans, he wails and he groans, and the bear blubbers on. Mouse squeaks, don't fret, don't fuss, look, see, we can pop more corn, we can brew more tea. Bear gulps, bear gobbles, he sighs with delight, then he spins tall tales through the blustery night. When the sun peeks up on a crisp, clear dawn. Bear can't sleep, but his friends snore on. All right, y'all. So that's this evening's program on Storm. So we had Bear Snores On by Karma Wilson with pictures by Jane Chapman. We had some from me, from Daughters, and also Navigation. We had poems from Deborah Akers from Backward Pilgrim. And some bits of short story from Karen Russell from Orange World, Tornado Auction. And finally, Yann Martel's Life of Pi. So if you liked what you heard tonight, I encourage you to get the books from your local independent booksellers, curbside or ordering online to support them during this hard time. And I'll see you next week. Night, y'all.